All right. Welcome to the 6th Federal Funding Learning Series webinar as part of our broader series here, particularly targeted at helping local governments, public entities, community partners, and other nonprofits figure out how to navigate this overwhelming but absolutely necessary time of federal funding and incentives. So welcome to our 6th episode, which is really focused on how you can afford to advance climate action and strategically plan for federal funding and incentives. My name is Matthew Popkin. I'm a manager with Rocky Mountain Institute, or RMI, and I'm going to be introducing the team that we have assembled for you today. We have a series of experts who have been supporting and will be speaking today. I'm joined by Alex Dane and Andrew Light from the World Resources Institute, Tansy Massey Green and Jingyi Tang, and myself from Rocky Mountain Institute and RMI, and Amy Turner from the city's Climate Law Initiative with the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. Thank you all for joining us, and you have a great bench here. We will be taking questions as we walk through this today at the end. So feel free to put any questions in the Q&A, submit them through the Q&A box in the Zoom interface here. We will do our best to respond to as many as we can, either in writing or orally. And if there are some that you don't have answered, please follow up with us after if you think it's a really critical question for your project to move forward or for your community to move forward. The one other thing I'll note is this is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be available consistent with our federal funding learning series, so that you can see all of these episodes and be able to refer back to this material as you continue to work forward. So if we don't talk through everything today that's on every slide, don't worry, you will have the opportunity. You don't have to screen capture everything. We'll be sending out the recording and slides. Q&A aside, and after this welcome, I'm gonna pass it over to my colleague Tansy to walk us through the Afford funding tool and funding guidance update. Some of you may be familiar with that tool already, which is great. Then we'll move over to a section briefly spotlighting a few near-term federal opportunities to be aware of if you aren't already. And then last but certainly not least, we'll go over to Amy Turner, who's going to give us some practical guidance for thinking about direct pay in your projects. We'll then wrap up with that Q&A that I mentioned at the beginning, and then bid you farewell and hope you enjoy the rest of your week. So with that, before we dive into the content, as I mentioned, we're going to be using some poll questions throughout this just to gauge kind of who's here. Obviously, we don't have the ability or time to walk through and have everyone introduce themselves. So with that, I'm going to briefly launch a couple poll questions here just to get us going and help everyone understand who's here. So on your screen, you should see this question, getting to know our audience. So welcome. The 3 questions here are: which type of organization do you work within? How would you describe the community you represent or are based in? And this is our 6th webinar in this learning series. And if you've joined us before, please let us know. So go ahead and take a few seconds to work through those questions, and then we'll share the results just so you know who else is joining among this group of 120 esteemed individuals. I'll leave this up for another 10, 15 seconds. All right, we're going to finish here. If you haven't clicked through all of them, finish your thoughts there. I'm going to wrap this up in 5 seconds and then share the results just so you can see who else is joining us today. Great. All right, I'm going to end this poll here. Don't worry, there'll be some more if you missed that one. And I'm going to share the results just so you can see as well. Here we have a whole wide range of folks joining from different types of organizations today, which is exciting. Majority coming from local governments or nonprofits or other community organizations. So welcome to all of you. A lot of folks, over 50% of folks joining from a large city, 200,000 plus population or more, but with representation across rural, small cities, and medium-sized cities as well. So thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, we don't have the privilege of having anyone who has seen every single episode of our learning series, but we do have many returning customers. So welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome for your first time here. We're glad to have you. So before we move on to our next session, I'm going to launch one more question here. And this is just a single question in this poll. Why are you interested in pursuing federal funding? And this is a multiple, you can select multiple answers here. So choose all that apply or all that you're comfortable sharing. Just want to understand why you're even joining us today and how you're thinking about federal funding going forward. And as you're thinking about this, realize there's no wrong answer here, unless you're really only focused on endlessly scrolling through grants.gov. I'm going to close this up in 5 seconds. All right, we're going to wrap up this poll. And just to show you kind of the diversity of perspectives of people joining here today, a lot of people are joining because are interested in this because it's been a directive from the top down. That's certainly a common story. Trying to think about how to accelerate a project or think about greater impact or innovation and ambition. That's fantastic. Very real needs there to fill budget gaps. A few people I have some concerns about in terms of their favorite hobby here. And then other people just coming here to learn. So thank you all for joining us, regardless of your reason. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing our poll for now. We'll come back to some poll questions going forward. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Tansy Massey-Green. Tansy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tansy Massey-Green. I am a senior associate on the Cities and America's All In team. And it's really great to see some familiar names here. I'm really glad folks from all over are joining. I'm going to talk about what the FFOLD tool is that we've just launched and how to use it. First off, though, we're going to do a poll question on if you know much about the FFOLD tool or the FFOLD tool. So we're going to open up this poll now, and the questions are: what is your familiarity with the FFOLD tool, formerly known as FFOLD? Have you already used it? Have you heard about it but not used it, or it's your first time hearing about it? And the second question is, in addition to the FFOLD tool, have you ever used our funding guidance resource? So please answer those questions, and we'll close that up and show the results so it can inform the next part of our discussion. Matthew, why don't you close up the poll whenever you think it is the right time?
Sounds good. Thanks, Tansy. We'll leave it open for about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end that poll for right now. Keep us moving forward. And just to share the results here, we do have some people, about 10% of folks joining us today have already used the tool, maybe under its previous name. Fantastic. We're glad that you've used it, and we hope that you enjoy the enhancements and updates. Many have heard about it before, but have not used it. And a majority of people joining us today actually have not heard about it before. So we hope that this is enlightening, and we hope that this is useful. With the funding guidance, that's far fewer people here have actually heard about it, many of which are hearing about it for the first time. So great. Regardless of whether you have already used these, have heard about it, but haven't used, hopefully this next session here is going to show you some of the highlights of the features that can hopefully be helpful to help advance your ability to better navigate the federal funding landscape. So I'll stop sharing. Tansy, why don't you walk them through this?
Thank you. So we developed the Afford tool because we want to make sure that you are maximizing your potential as you put your energy and resources into whatever projects you want to pursue. So if we take your goals that you want to pursue, decarbonization and equity goals, the time you put in, the capacity that you have, and the resources that are available, we want to make sure you're getting the biggest bang for your buck as you put all these things together. The bottom line is that we know your goals, your time and capacity likely have not changed that much in the last 2 or so years. But what has changed are the resources available for local governments and nonprofits by quite a bit, actually, with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So we developed Afford to make it easier for you to know about what funding is available for you. Afford stands for America's Federal Funding Opportunities and Resources for Decarbonization. Pretty much a mouthful, which is why we're going with the word afford. And the goal of Afford is to accelerate state and local decarbonization efforts. We created Afford with the primary use cases of, like I said, identifying federal funding opportunities available for specific local projects, but also to help nonprofit entities and local governments strategically prioritize which grant applications you apply for, and then to make sure the funding sources are aligned with your overarching decarbonization and equity considerations. The second use cases for Afford are to increase alignment within your organization or consultants that work with you to make sure you're all on the same page as you pursue federal funding opportunities, and to embrace the federal efforts to centralize climate change, environmental justice, and equity in new projects. Building on FFOLD, with some of you have used before, but many of you have not, Afford is now packed with more IRA incentives, and we've changed the tool so that, or we've built on the tool so that it is now available for not just local governments, but a whole other list of audience groups. The tool now has 80 new programs added, bringing us to a total of, I think, about 248 federal funding opportunities listed. And this includes 24 tax credits and deductions from the Inflation Reduction Act. There are now, in addition to local governments, new audience groups, including municipal utility and co-ops, cultural institutions and faith groups, healthcare institutions, and colleges and universities. And then the complementary funding guidance has a couple new pages as well, and I'm going to walk through what the funding guidance is in just a few slides, but we now have new pages on preparing for grant applications, what to expect when you're expecting to apply, stacking and leveraging resources so that you can add up all the different funding opportunities to fund most of your projects or all of your projects, and then the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. So let me walk you through now how the Afford tool works and some of the improvements that we've made building on the FFOLD tool. If you've never heard of FFOLD, don't worry, I'm gonna pretend like no one's ever heard of FFOLD as I walk through this demo. So the Afford tool starts off with an introduction page asking you various questions to make the filtering experience work for your needs. And if you don't want these introductory questions, you can actually skip all the questions and go directly to the tool with that little bottom right at the bottom of this view right here. So when you get to the tool, you're going to be asked if you're new to applying for federal funding. If the answer is yes, I encourage you to check out that funding guidance that I'm going to talk about in a few slides. And then it's going to ask you to tell us about yourself, what type of entity you are, whether it be an institution of higher education, a faith group, a state, a local government. So you'll choose one of those, and then you're going to choose what type of project you want to pursue. We have a ton of options here, like bright fields, electric grid upgrades, energy storage, building electrification. You can choose as many or as few as you like for this section. And then finally, it's going to ask you what type of funding you're interested in pursuing, whether that be a grant, a loan, a tax credit. And again, you can choose as many as you want here. When you click continue to the tool, you'll get a page that looks just like this, where all of the filters that you've selected are going to be entered into the filter fields. So applicant type, project type, funding type, and then project phase. And you'll get the list of funding opportunities that fits within the filters. In this case, we have 62 programs getting displayed out of the 248 funding opportunities available. This page will show you the program name, the purpose, the eligibility requirements, and the max award and the deadline. And this is just a little bit of the information that we have on each program. But if you are interested in learning more about each of the programs listed, you can go into the program name field, and then you'll get a lot more information about each program, including decarbonization considerations, equity considerations, and helpful tips. On this page, you can search throughout the program name and the purpose by keyword. So if there's a specific program you have in mind that you want to get all the information on, like let's say the investment tax credit, you'll just type that in and then you'll see the investment tax credit as a result. And as I said, this right now is showing the 62 programs that I used as an example for this demo. But if you mess around with the filters, change them up, add a few, take away, that number will change and you'll get more or less opportunities that present to you. And you can always reset all the filters to start over or to even look at all the programs available. Another cool feature that we've added is the compare and share function. This allows you to look at all the programs or a couple of the programs that you're interested in and line them up with the other programs that you're also considering. So you can choose up to 4 programs that you're interested in comparing. You'll choose this compare button underneath the title of the program of the opportunity. And then you'll click this button, compare selected opportunities. And that'll give you a page that looks like this. We designed this so that it was kind of similar to comparing the credit card feature that you might see on NerdWallet or any of those compare features on various websites. So in line, you'll see the purposes for each opportunity, the funding available, the various allocations. And so this will help you prioritize which program, so you have all the fields, all the features in one spot. And then from this page, you can actually create a new URL and share that with your colleagues so that you can share the different opportunities with everyone working on federal funding on your team. Finally, I want to tell you all about the funding guidance. This is a resource that works in tandem with the FFOLD tool, and it's been designed to walk you through what you need to do to effectively prepare for federal funding opportunities. On the funding guidance, there's a section on developing a strategy, and this is mostly a new portion of the funding guidance, so definitely go and check it out. Has information on it like preparing for grant applications, developing an outline for your grant application. And then the next part of the funding guidance is understanding of the available funding. And in this, we talk about the different types of federal funding available, like grants or tax credits or loans, and a couple other resources. And then we have understanding the available incentives. And this is where you'll learn things like what's direct pay for tax exempt entities, or how do I leverage the adders for the various clean energy tax incentives. That's all there. And then the last section is on Justice 40 and equity considerations. So please, if you're new to funding, or even if you want some strategic guidance, check out the funding guidance because we designed it so it would help folks like all of you. And finally, as you're using this tool, play around with it, get into it, and please give us feedback. We're always open to it, and we want to make sure we are always improving the tool. I will now pass it off to Alex Dane from the World Resources Institute, who's going to be talking about near-term opportunities.
Hey there. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Dane. I'm a senior manager at the World Resources Institute and our energy program. We're a nonprofit based out of DC, but we do work all across the US, working with cities, local governments on the clean energy transition. We're going to take a little bit of time to kind of go through the hotness list, the top 5 considerations and sort of top 5 lists. So this isn't all encompassing, but some tantalizing opportunities that are sitting out there for you right now. And you can find these also on the funding guidance and or the Afford tool within itself. So we're going to touch on EECBG. We're going to touch on Renew America School Program, the CPRGs or Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, touch briefly on the opportunity of the Low Income Communities Bonus Credit program, and then also what are some emerging low cost of capital opportunities that are coming down the line here. So just on our fun list of trends and opportunities to watch, a lot of you who are sitting in the local government position or state level government are familiar with EECBG. It was authorized, about 12 years ago. Now it's been reauthorized, and it's a direct formula grant allocation for entitlement communities, as well as to states, and states also pass through to non-entitlement communities. So ostensibly, there's a high likelihood that most folks get a piece of the pie and how they want to spend it. There's 14 different categories, and you can use it kind of across the board, from energy efficiency retrofits to renewable energy on municipal and public facilities to, thinking outside the box and coming up with innovative finance mechanisms. What's new this year, what's important to know is that DOE, you can have the option of either taking the funding, the formula, or selecting a voucher program. Let's say you're kind of thin on capacity, and the voucher program really unlocks just technical assistance that can really shape and be additive to the work that you're doing if you choose to not pursue sort of the use of funding as a whole. What else is new? The deadline right now, entitlement communities and states, there's something called an ECS. It's like a strategy of how do I intend to use this funding. That was due in January, but they just extended that out to April. So there's a little bit more time to think about how to utilize that funding and what that can look like. So again, it's not authorized to the same amount that it was before, but it is a unique non-competitive formula grant fund out there that you can use to tailor to your needs. Also coming up right now, as we think about our municipal operations, we got our community-wide footprint and our community-wide partners. Something of interest right now is the Department of Energy's Renew America School Program that can be used to purpose direct improvements on schools. So it can go towards a number of different entities that do the work itself across a number of those different project types. This was launched in 2022, and there's been sort of greater transparency of what those awards look like. And in the graph on the right hand side, you can see the different types of measures of what was awarded and to what purpose. And interesting enough, as we go through this clean energy transition, when we're thinking about HVAC improvements, some of those were directly for like the electrification and sort of displacing thermal load too. So a great opportunity when you're starting to raise with school districts and community partners to get this work done, and there'll be another round of funding that's coming up. So let's get that on our radar. Again, this is something you can find in the Afford tool, but something that's really interesting out there. Also, right now, you are probably involved in the planning of EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grants. It's a one-time tranche funding that is going to go to purpose a whole host of different types of projects, but ultimately they're looking to reduce GHG reductions and bring substantial community benefit and what that looks like. The award is large, and it's going to go out to sort of different segments out there in the market of tribal territories and also MSAs. MSAs are sort of an organizing planning organization, as are states for this. And right now we're in this planning phase. There's been a planning phase, and it's an opportunity to embed local projects and your ideas into the plan that the MSA, state, or tribe submits. So a project won't get funded unless it's in the May 1st deadline. And it's a good point to figure out right now who your sort of organizing entity is, because we're in this window of opportunity. And what they'll do ostensibly is submit a list of these priority projects within their geography that's aligned with their climate plan. And EPA is going to decide which projects are going to get awarded. So it's kind of, I wouldn't call it a low lift, but an important lift to engage with this sort of master list that's being submitted to EPA, because who knows, you might get awarded, and you might get awarded substantially for one of these projects that can be used for multiple purposes. Also, this is we're going to touch on this. Amy is going to touch on this a little bit, but as we look into the Inflation Reduction Act, right now there's a big sort of big focus on Justice 40 and implementing what that looks like, and we're starting to see that come to fruition. So right now for projects, there's something called the Low Income Communities Bonus Credit Program for renewable energy tax credits. It's a mouthful, but what it does is for qualifying projects on top of elective pay and on top of just general projects, there's an ability to get a credit that can range from 10 to 20% for capital costs. So really writing down the cost of projects where they're being situated and where they qualify for this bonus credit. The program is segmented into sort of how these credits are going to be dispersed. So there's an upper end allocation. So sort of the size of projects in aggregate that would qualify for the low income communities, for tribes, for covered housing programs. We're thinking about our friends at PHAs and public housing authorities, and then discrete economic development projects. But this just opened up, and it's an important thing to know if you're thinking about pursuing this tax credit, because the first tranche of projects that get preference for this, there's a due date that's coming up in 3 days, but after that there's going to be a rolling application as well. But again, there's an upper limit to the credit based on sort of those capacity allocations. So it's need to thread that needle, the timing, getting it qualified, going through the portal, but on the upside there's significant project savings. How do we find out where our low-income communities are, where our Justice 40 communities are, and where our energy communities are, all of which can reap the benefits of IRA incentives? We just have a link here that was added in. There's an all-in map out there where you can enter in your geography and see specifically which sort of census tracts and areas within your community qualify for these bonuses. What's the takeaway here? Where these projects are situated really matter, and the different types of credits and incentives that you could capture. And this map here that's been developed by All In RMI WRI gives you a chance to take a look at sort of what those delineations are and what those where those credits align within your community. Okay, so right now, projects that we're going to touch on elective pay in a little bit, but the ability to deploy projects for municipal facilities, community-wide, there's going to be a wave of low-cost capital that's coming down the line through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and it's going to come through in 3 different mechanisms. Right now, the application for Solar for All just closed, but the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, administered by the EPA, is going to establish 3 different channels of getting billions of dollars into lending that public institutions can take advantage of at interest rates that are just way below market rate and over term rates, to make sure the savings are there for the end user, for these public entities and community organizations. So there'll be a national clean investment fund where 14 billion is being administered by 2 or 3 nonprofits you could be the direct lendee of these greenhouse gas reduction funds from those entities. There's Solar for All, which is really getting into your community and subsidizing and enhancing access to solar for low income market segments. And then the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator is really targeted towards low income and disadvantaged lending. And they're going to push the money from EPA down to 2 to 7 hub nonprofits. And then those nonprofits are going to send billions out into local CDFIs. So right now, we've already touched on public schools being an important partner, thinking about public housing authorities and how they can take advantage of some of these credits, and then also your relationship with your local CDFIs as key to unlocking sort of this suite of options here. And, you know, access to low-cost financing has been around. So for folks who have water treatment and water facilities and water management, EPA's Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund has already been kind of a proxy for what this low interest enabling mechanism is to get different projects going. So definitely not a new concept. And also there's a new program that's coming out there. It's a HUD program really designed for HUD assisted multifamily housing. And again, another corollary program that's going to offer both direct loans and grants. So Q1, I'd say Q2 for the capitalization of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and seeing those funds leave EPA and start to get into the market. And then for the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, really being aware of these upcoming deadlines as you interface with sort of the folks on the ground who interact with HUD and PHAs. Hey, as we look through it, give me a logic model. What does it look like? You want to think through it. You know, how do you navigate all these opportunities and how do you sort that in your mind? And here's just some questions. Like, as I'm thinking about formula funding, am I using it to sort of the highest and best use? Is there a pre-existing project I'm trying to already use it for? What does that look like? And then beyond something that's already kind of landing in your lap, when we're thinking about competitive funding, do we have staff capacity to pursue this? And would competitive funding and competitive grants you would find on Afford really fill in the gap or catalyze projects that wouldn't happen otherwise? Alternatively, if you can't find funding per se within formula or competitive grants, start to look to your states, because the state energy program is going to be right now sort of reauthorized with unmatched funding, which gives them more latitude to develop new programs and think through what can be offered through the state, what that looks like. There's going to be the creation and expansion of state revolving loan funds that could help catalyze the projects that you want to advance. And then also, we already touched on it, the access down the line for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the ability to capitalize projects in that manner. So with that, an overview, the top 5 list of exciting things coming down the line. It's not comprehensive, but it is fun.
Great. Thanks, Alex. I know there's a lot of information there. Before we move on to our final section of this webinar, I do want to briefly launch this question just to get a sense of what people are already thinking about of the programs that we discussed already. So feel free to respond here. I will note that these are anonymous. This poll question is anonymous, so we'll not be tracking that by respondent because we know some of them are competitive programs, and we don't want you to feel like you can't respond to this out of a sense of competition here. So this is purely just for group awareness of what people are thinking about, not specific by respondent. And again, the slides will be shared and the recording will be shared after this. So, you know, if there are a few details from the slides that Alex walked through that you want to go back and take a look at, you'll have that opportunity. All right, I'm going to wrap up the poll in 5 seconds here. And then we're going to pass it over to Amy Turner from the Sabin Climate Change Law Center. All right, so with that, just for a little bit of group awareness here, people are really thinking about these programs, whether they're formula or competitive or financing programs. Most of you are already giving a lot of thought to this. So we hope this was helpful in thinking about it. And we hope that the funding guidance and the Afford tool will help you really try to determine which ones you want to prioritize and pursue. So with that, Amy, you should now be able to take it from here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matthew. Here we go. I promise no poll questions, if only because I don't know how to use that feature on Zoom. Thank you all for having me. We're obviously hearing a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, recently, and the way that the myriad ways that the Act's various programs apply to you and to people in your communities. And simply put, there is a lot of information out there, more than probably any one person can digest, certainly more than I can digest. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to speak about the very new way in which the IRA makes certain tax credits for climate and clean energy and clean vehicle spending available to non-taxpayers, in particular state and local governments and nonprofit organizations, for the very first time this year. Before we launch into my presentation, I will just say that while I am a lawyer, I am not your lawyer. Nothing in this presentation should be understood to be legal advice. This talk is really meant to provide a lay of the land, and you should work with your attorneys, tax professionals, consultants, etc., for more individual consultations on your specific circumstances. So if you have been paying attention, you may have heard a number of different estimates for the IRA's value in terms of investment in climate and clean energy. The Congressional Budget Office issued a $369 billion estimate on climate and clean energy spending right after the bill passed into law, later upped that to $391 billion. And we've seen some other estimates as high as 500 million, or 500 billion rather, or all the way up to $1.2 trillion worth of climate and clean energy spending in the IRA. The reason for that is that no one knows how much spending the IRA involves, because while we can tally up the value of the IRA's grant programs, the tax credit side of the IRA depends on the uptake of those tax credits. So if residents, households, businesses, nonprofits, and governments use the tax credits, they will be worth a lot more, obviously, than if they don't. So some of these estimates really vary wildly, and we can't really measure the aggregate value of those tax credits because they're effectively uncapped. They depend on the initiative of the ultimate users of those credits. So what does that have to do with the folks tuned into this program? Well, for the first time ever, really, the IRA makes certain federal tax credits available to non-tax-paying entities, including nonprofits and state and local governments. And it does this through a mechanism called elective pay, or commonly referred to as direct pay, in a new section of the tax code. Elective pay is the official term used by the IRS. Direct pay tends to be what people call the mechanism when they talk about it. They are referring to the same thing. And however you refer to it, this really opens up the world of tax credit financed clean energy and clean transportation spending to non-taxpayers, nonprofits, state and local governments, and others. So, if you think about the way that tax credits have been used in the past to spur clean energy spending, in the past, those tax credits were only directly usable by entities that had tax liability. The credit served as an offset to that liability. And what it meant in practical terms was that an entity that didn't have sufficient tax liability, or perhaps didn't have any tax liability, like a governmental entity or a nonprofit, had to enter into a complicated financial transaction with an entity that did have significant tax liability that it wanted to offset. And these kinds of transactions tended to erode the value of those credits. This all effectively meant that nonprofits, local governments, state governments, and other non-taxable entities just didn't use these tax credits. It wasn't worth it. There are a number of entities eligible for direct pay. I work most closely with local governments, but any entity that has tax exempt status of some sort under Section 501 of the tax code is eligible. Most notably, probably for this group, 501c3s and c4s. States, local governments, territorial governments are eligible to use direct pay, as are any of their agencies and instrumentalities. So this would get at things like school districts, departments of transportation, economic development agencies, and the like. Municipally owned utilities can also use direct pay, and so can Indian tribal governments, Alaska Native corporations, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and rural electric co-ops. So it's worth noting, worth noting that even though a lot of entities are eligible for direct pay, there are some pretty significant limitations. So partnerships, for the most part, are not eligible. There may be some ways to structure joint ownership of an asset, but you would not, for example, be able to enter into a partnership with a renewable power producer and take direct pay of tax credits. You actually have to own the asset that you're claiming the tax credit for. So if someone else owns the asset, they are the ones that get the tax credit. And you may have heard of a related concept in the IRA referred to as transferability. Transferability allows tax credits to be more easily transferred from one party to another, but this is only for taxpayers. Non-taxpayers are not eligible to use it. Entities that are non-taxpayers, any of the folks on this list, have got to use direct pay to access those tax credits. So under the new system, non-taxpayers can claim the applicable credit amount via the new mechanism. It's not particularly difficult to do, but it is a bureaucratic process, and it's going to be one that is new to your teams and you'll have to pay close attention to. The way this will work is that a local government, state government, agency, non-taxpayer, whichever entity claiming the direct pay, files a registration form on an online portal with the IRS. The IRS is planning to open this registration portal by the end of the year. Each project that is registered on this, each project that's registered on this portal will get a unique registration number that you'll save and use later. Then the entity files a tax return between 4.5 months and 10.5 months after the end of its fiscal year. This time frame is the same as the tax filing deadline for nonprofits. Your 990 is due 4.5 months after the close of your tax year, and you're eligible to request an automatic 6-month extension, putting the final deadline at 10.5 months after the end of the tax year. For those that don't have tax years, because you don't file tax returns, and this is very common among governmental entities and agencies, you'll use the close of your fiscal year closes December 31st. Your filings are due May 15th with an automatic extension to November 15th if you request it. You'll file whichever version of the Form 990, either that your organization is used to filing, or for local governments and other governmental entities, you'll file a form called the 990T. You'll also file a form called Form 3800, which tallies the credits, and then any credit-specific forms. And you'll include your registration number that you got in step 1 on that registration portal in your filings. And then the IRS actually makes the payment to you after it reviews your tax return. It makes a cash payment in the value of what would otherwise be a tax credit. I don't know how long this is going to take. I would assume that submissions will not be reviewed until after the applicable deadlines, and then the cash payment would be made after the IRS has the opportunity to review the tax filings, review the direct pay filings. So at any rate, I would plan for the cash payment, the direct pay payment, to not actually be made to you until some way midway through the year after you actually place the project in service. So you may need to figure out some gap financing or work with your teams to properly account for that several months to over a year-long gap in financing. So I want to acknowledge that filing federal tax returns, old hat for nonprofits, but not typically something that governmental entities have to do. The form you'll file is called the 990T. It is not at all a full accounting of your municipality or agency's finances for the year. It's a form that's more specifically tailored to use for claiming tax credits. With that Form 990T, you'll need to provide supporting documentation that the project meets credit requirements, including a Form 3800 with the credit calculations, the registration number, and any source-specific forms. And there are a few other bureaucratic considerations to keep in mind. The first is that you have to make the direct pay election correctly the first time. Once you file that tax return, there does not currently appear to be an opportunity to amend it if you claimed the tax credits incorrectly. The IRS is still finalizing the rules, but as the rules currently stand, there's no opportunity to amend those filings later. You've got to do it the first time. And you've got to register on that IRS portal before you file the tax return. So you do have that extension to 10.5 months after the end of your fiscal year. But once you file your tax forms for that year, there's no opportunity to change your direct pay election. It's a one-time go. I mentioned this on the last slide, but you also won't get the money back until after the IRS reviews your Form 990 and the related documentation. So you'll need to find financing for the time before you actually get your money back. That can be quite a big gap for some entities that are looking to take advantage of direct pay. This is also very new, and you may need to get staff members from different teams together early on to make sure they know how to work together to make this all happen. I noted on this slide, it could be a particular issue for local governments, but I think any larger organization that's not used to claiming these kinds of credits, could have this issue. They need to get folks into a room or on the same page early on in the process. So you'll just want to have, sustainability staff or whoever is tasked with making the procurement decisions, establish a line of communication with whichever team in your city or your organization or your agency has responsible for accounting and other financial matters. So I like to put all the bad news on just one slide, because even though there may be some growing pains, the direct pay has so much potential for non-taxpayers that have historically been excluded from the tax credit markets. This is guaranteed money if your project meets the criteria for the underlying tax credits. You don't have to apply for it. You have to file for the direct pay of the credit. You have to make those tax filings, but you don't have to scope out your project to appeal to agency reviewers of a grant application. The credits are mostly uncapped. You can use these as much as you want. Each individual credit obviously has a cap, but in general, these credits don't have an aggregate cap. One exception we'll talk about, but generally no aggregate cap. You can do as many projects as you want. These credits are often stackable with grants and other forms of financing and funding, so you can combine a grant and a tax credit in many instances. And they, for the most part, don't involve extended reporting the way a grant might. You make the filing and then you're done. You don't have to, report year after year after year how things are going. So in short, this just really changes the economics of clean energy spending for local governments and really opens up local governments to this very straightforward source of funding. So we talked a lot about sort of the process here of direct pay. We'll talk a little bit more about the substance now. So what credits is direct pay actually usable for? There are 12 that are nominally eligible for direct pay, but I'm going to highlight 4 of them that I think are particularly useful to the folks on this program. The first 2 credits I'll cover are the ones that are most relevant to renewable energy projects of all sizes, from the smaller scale rooftop solar projects on city buildings, schools, nonprofit hospitals, private buildings, and the like, all the way up to larger utility scale clean energy production. So, we could basically have whole sessions on the clean energy investment tax credit, ITC, and the production tax credit, PTC. Probably many of you have sat through full sessions on these tax credits. But, very, very briefly, both of them offer quite a bit of money for new clean energy projects. The ITC offers a tax credit of between 6% and 30% for wind and solar projects, 6% and 30% of the cost for wind and solar projects, as well as other forms of clean energy development. That 6% to 30% spread is based on whether the project meets prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, and those requirements are generally waived for projects smaller than 1 megawatt nameplate capacity. The ITC in particular, available for the year the project is placed in service. Production tax credit, the PTC, is a 0.55 cent to 2.75 cent per kilowatt hour tax credit for solar and wind energy projects, as well as other forms of clean energy development. Again, the spread is based on meeting prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. And unlike the ITC, the PTC pays out over time based on renewable energy production. It pays out over 10 years. So you make the filing to the IRS once a year, every 10 years. And you choose one or the other for each project, ITC or PTC, not both. Both credits also have significant bonus credit amounts available. Sometimes these are referred to as bonuses or adders. There's a 2 to 10% increase for meeting domestic content requirements. I should note that domestic content requirements function as more of an actual requirement for many tax-exempt entities, because otherwise the overall tax credit amount for projects larger than 1 megawatt starts to phase down starting in 2024. There's another 2 to 10% increase for citing a project in what the IRA refers to as an energy community. These are communities experiencing high unemployment or in which a coal power plant or coal mine has been shut down in the last couple of decades. There's also a low-income community bonus credit that Alex talked about of 10 to 20%. This one is capped, so it's an exception to the notion that these are all uncapped. Application window is open now, also as Alex mentioned, but this is another one of several bonuses and adders that can augment the value of the ITC or the PTC. So I get a lot of questions about whether the ITC or the PTC is the preferable credit. I would generally say that sort of economic analysis would really be better put to others on this call. RMI and WRI both have some experience in this area, and I do not. But what I would note is that if bureaucracy is what scares you, the ITC is a one-time credit that you claim for the tax year you put the project in service. It's one and done. The PTC pays out over 10 years, so you have to gather the data and make that filing many more times. The ITC also offers more certainty around costs. It's a credit against the cost of the project, not against production. So you're not making 10-year projections about how much energy the project can generate. You claim the credit based on your investment in the project. Another credit that we'll go through just quickly, may be of interest to the folks in this room, the Clean Commercial Vehicle Tax Credit under Section 45W of the tax code. This one's a lot more straightforward, I promise. Very easy way to get free money for zero emissions and other clean vehicles. It offers up to a 30% tax credit for the purchase of qualified clean commercial vehicles, capped at $40,000 for vehicles larger than 14,000 pounds. And $7,500 for vehicles smaller than 1,400 pounds. So you can use this credit to switch out fleet vehicles, school buses, sanitation vehicles, and on and on. Just very simply a way to lower the cost of the vehicles you may be looking to replace anyway. Another one we will go through just quickly is the credit for alternative vehicle fueling properties. May be of use to nonprofits and governmental entities. This is under Section 30C of the tax code. This is a credit for between 6 and 30% of the cost of charging equipment for vehicles using electricity, hydrogen, or natural gas, up to $100,000. This credit is only good for fueling infrastructure built in non-urban area census tracts or in low-income communities. So you can't use this one everywhere, but there are a good number of places where this would be applicable. So, bringing this all together, the new accessibility of these tax credits through direct pay really has the potential to transform the market for renewable energy and other forms of climate investment by supporting your organizations, governments, and agencies' efforts to decarbonize. It is new, it's all bureaucratically still a bit scary, but it's a fairly simple process by which non-tax-paying entities can access this form of funding, this cash payment in lieu of a tax credit. Excitingly, the tax credits are available now. The IRS guidance that has been issued is still preliminary, but it does apply at the moment. But more importantly, the IRA statutorily makes these tax credits available as of January 1st of this year, 10 months ago. So projects that you are placing in service now are eligible. The IRS has issued preliminary guidance on this. It's had a public comment period. It's reviewing those comments. I would expect to see slightly revised guidance, but I don't think that I don't think this is going to be changed so drastically that any of this will be, wrong in a way that can't be sort of addressed easily. This is largely how this is going to work. And these tax credits are available now and really can be very valuable to non-taxpayers like local governments and nonprofits. I just want to say one final word. This can feel a bit uncertain, but these kinds of tax credits have been used by the private sector for decades. The cash payment aspect of it, the direct payment aspect of it is new, but the tax credit approach is not. This is really not something to be scared of. I hope that local governments, agencies, nonprofits are able to realize the huge potential that direct pay offers. These tax credits are available now. They're generous, they're uncapped, and they are non-competitive. So this really has the potential to change the landscape. I'll stop there and hand the reins back over to Matthew.
Great. Thank you so much for that deep dive on direct pay, Amy. I'm going to briefly launch one additional poll question here, just to get a sense of what we're learning from this, especially on the director elective pay section. So this is just one question. Go ahead and take a look and fill this out. We're going to basically wrap up here, but for a couple questions we'll take orally and try to respond to with Amy, Tansy, Alex, and myself. The one other thing I'll note is we do have a series of other resources that will be linked to in this slide deck when we send this out. So we hope that not only you find value in the Afford tool, the funding guidance, and the IRA mapper that we shared, but some of these other guidebooks or handbooks that can help make this just a little bit more digestible as you go through this. So again, finish filling out that poll question if you haven't already. And otherwise, we're going to just shift to a few questions here. And I'm going to welcome Amy, Tansy, Alex back to the extent that we can contribute there. And just as all of the panelists are joining here, I just want to thank you all again for sharing your wisdom and insights. There were a lot of people who knew something about these topics that we talked about, but we're excited to learn more. And about 30% of attendees here had a lot of new content, especially on the direct pay and elective pay topic. So thank you all. All right, so we're going to stick around here for a couple more minutes. Jingyi, are there a couple questions that you think would benefit the group for us to speak to directly here?
Yes, I know we only have a few minutes. Let's get started with one question about the partnership about the direct pay. So, Amy, what is considered a partnership when we talk about direct pay? If a facility is co-owned by multiple entities, is it eligible for direct pay?
So good question. So partnerships in this instance are going to be considered most ways in which more than one party would own a clean energy asset. It doesn't cover every single way that parties might co-own an asset. There's a legal structure called a tenancy in common, for example, which is not super common in the renewable energy space, which gives each co-owner a lot of power over the asset, so to speak. So there are certain ways that partnerships could be structured to avoid being considered, quote, partnerships for direct pay, but these are, just generally, it would be like letting the tail wag the dog. You generally would not structure ownership of assets in this way. If two municipalities were to co-own an energy asset, that would most likely be considered a partnership, and so would not be eligible for direct pay.
Thank you, Amy. One more question, maybe about the Afford 2. I'll pass this question to Matthew or Tansy. Does Afford resource include the total of federal regulations or grant management guidelines?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the important thing to know, and Tansy talked about this a little bit with the Afford tool here, is that we're trying to make the decision process a little bit easier in terms of prioritizing what you pursue with Afford. Through the Afford tool, when you go to the specific program page, it will link directly to the agency website or the grants.gov website. And so that's an opportunity where you can go deeper on the Code of Federal Regulations or other agency guidelines that are required there, including the NOFO or the funding opportunity announcement.
Okay. Do we still have time for a few more questions, or shall we stop here?
Yeah, let's do one or two more.
Okay, cool. We got another question about the pay for Amy. Do you know when the portal will be up so the users can submit 990 TCS for 2023 projects?
I was on mute. Sorry about that. The IRS has said that it will be up by the end of the year. I don't have any particular inside info there.
Cool. Okay, well, maybe one more question. Let's put this question for Alice. I know it's a really difficult question, but I hope that you then provide some insight in a few words. We got a question from Aaron. For federal funding program that provide performance-based incentives, how should entities use a multi-year approach when they plan the project? Alice, do we want to follow up with Aaron after that?
I think we might need to on that one, unless I'm sure there's smarter people than myself on this call if they want to try and field that in real time, but I don't want to give any wrong advice.
Thank you, Alice.
Well, I think that's probably a good segue that we appreciate all of the detailed questions that you've all submitted throughout this. We'll do our best to respond to those in writing after the fact as well, because there's a lot of really good information that hopefully you can learn from that. So with that, maybe I will just wrap up and say thank you again for joining us for our 6th learning series episode here. You can find all 6 of those episodes that started even before the infrastructure bill passed, available on cityrenewables.org, which we will link to in our follow-up email. And again, I want to thank all of the organizations, including Amy Turner for joining us as a guest today, as well as Bloomberg Philanthropies for making this all possible. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful week, and we wish you the best going forward. We know it's an overwhelming time, and we hope that these resources and some of this content and these insights can help you make progress a little bit easier and a little bit more efficiently. So thank you very much.